to find my best friend bleeding from a large stab wound on the right side of his neck. Every time he tried to breathe, the wound would make a horrible gasping sound. Horrified, I rushed to find an adult. By the time we'd returned, my friend was gone. After a brief investigation, our geography teacher was arrested and confessed. He'd been sexually abusing my friend and was forced to kill him when threatened with exposure. The reason I'm telling you this is that it's not true. But human brains only work in one direction. No matter how many times I tell you that this story is false, you can't change the fact that you saw the horrific images I conjured in your mind. And when you saw them, you felt something. The fact that I immediately recanted the story changes something, but not everything. Negation works in language. It doesn't work in brains. You can't unsee the huge pink elephant I just put in your head. The harder you try, the more you fail. If you feel it was irresponsible of me to lie to you about such a traumatic incident, you're not wrong. It was. The only reason I did is to illustrate the point. The media, the arts, and entertainment do this to you all the time. I recall a conversation between my mother and my grandmother in the 1990s. Soap operas were making inroads into the post-Soviet TV market for the first time, and millions of people, like my grandmother, would be glued to the television watching terrible Brazilian actors marry, cheat, and divorce each other with impressive regularity. My grandmother watched every betrayal, near-death experience, and predictable revelation with the emotional investment of someone watching their only child take their first steps. She howled with rage, gasped in shock, and exhaled with relief in all the right places on the emotional roller coaster. My mother seemed irritated by this and would playfully remind my grandmother that she was watching something that was fiction. My grandmother's response was not to argue the facts. "Leave me alone," she would exclaim, waving my mum's teasing comments away. Mum was right on the facts, but wrong on the feelings. The possibility that what you're watching is real is part of the appeal. Securing that suspension of disbelief is the first order of business for a piece of entertainment. I still remember watching the 2004 movie Crash, which depicts an America being torn apart by bigotry. From rich whites crossing the street to avoid blacks to racist cops sexually assaulting a black woman in front of her husband after pulling them over for no reason, the film chronicles an interconnected weave of discrimination that ends in tragedy. Is the film true? Well, every incident in it is statistically almost certain to have happened to someone somewhere at some time. But is it representative? Does it leave you with an appropriate level of perception of the issue? Do you believe that if you showed Crash to 1,000 people and then asked them questions about race relations, their answer would be the same as before they watched it? And do you imagine their perspective would be made more commensurate with the scale of the problem, or less? In a 2021 survey, people were asked how many unarmed black men are killed in America every year. Here's what they said. The actual number of unarmed black men killed that year was 11. In other words, regardless of political ideology, the majority of Americans exaggerate the scale of the problem by at least a factor of 10. And half of all liberals think 100 times more unarmed black men are killed by the police than actually are. I know these are abstract numbers, so think about it like this. You have $10,000 in the bank. I try to guess how much money you have. My guess is $1 million. That's the level of misunderstanding that's happening here. Media and entertainment are not the only reasons for this, of course. Most people are not remotely statistically literate. This is why men sometimes dismiss the amount of harassment and inappropriate sexual behavior women experience, and why man-hating feminists act like all men are predators. The reality is both are making the same mistake. Men who don't understand what it's like to be a woman assume that most men are like them and the men they know. So there couldn't possibly be a real problem with sexual harassment, according to them. Angry feminists, meanwhile, don't understand that their experiences and those of the women they know are real but are not being committed by statistically representative men. Quite the opposite. Most crime is committed by a very, very small minority of people who are unrepresentative. So it is perfectly possible that simultaneously most men are great and most women experience unwelcome advances, lewd comments, and worse. According to one study, 63% of all violent crime in Sweden was committed by just 1% of the population. Whatever the other correlations, the main thing these people have in common is not their race, income, status, or even the fact that almost all of them are men. It's that they are prepared to be violent in a country where almost everyone else is not. But art is powerful precisely because it bypasses the logical brain and hits you in the gut. Not only because emotions are more powerful than reason, but also because art can be beautiful. And like all beauty, it can be deceptive. A beautiful person is not necessarily a good person, and beautiful art is not necessarily true. So where does this leave adolescence? Well, for a start, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer described this piece of fiction as a documentary and wants it shown in schools up and down the country. I can see why. Whatever you think of the message behind it, adolescence taps into three primal fears that all parents have. The joys of parenthood come with a price. As a friend told me when my son was born, congratulations, your heart is now outside your body and in someone else's. The safety of his or her children is at the very top of every parent's list of worries. Your own mortality is a trivial concern in comparison. The second fear most parents have is the fear of failing their children. A huge part of the impact of adolescence is the sense in which normal parents doing their best end up raising a normal boy who stabs someone to death. And the third fear is the fear of the unknown. The series shows clueless adults attempting to make sense of the soup of modern social media in which their children swim. The internet is a portal of incomprehensible darkness which can turn your child into a murderer is a terrifying message for parents, especially if they don't actually understand the internet or consider giving young children unsupervised access to it to be normal. What's more, the series is beautifully made with great writing, fantastic acting from the entire cast, and no shortage of drama. But is the story Adolescence tells representative? And will the impact it has be proportional or even related to the real problem? I doubt it. If you lived through the COVID pandemic, I hardly need to tell you that people rarely make good decisions when they're afraid. The fact that this series has repeatedly been described as a documentary is extremely worrying. The child killer in Adolescence is 13 years old. According to the Ministry of Justice, just 17% of knife crime offences are committed by children aged between 10 and 17. If you make the reasonable assumption that the probability of offending rises with age, under 16s are probably responsible for around half of that 17%. He also comes from a stable two-parent home. While we don't have the exact statistics for the UK or for this specific crime, we do know that American children from fatherless homes are 5 times more likely to commit crime and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. That's not my line, it's Barack Obama's. The victim in Adolescence is female. 3/4 of stabbing victims in Britain are male. In other words, in a country in which young men in their late teens and early 20s with little to no male guidance or supervision are stabbing each other to death, we're encouraged to believe that the problem is children from intact households being groomed into misogyny on the internet. Adolescence is an excellent and powerful piece of fiction. It deserves accolades, praise, and recognition. What it does not deserve is to be treated as representative or even particularly useful in understanding what's actually happening in our country. Is Adolescence true? Here's what Netflix itself says. While Jamie's story specifically isn't based on a real person or event, the idea for the series did spring from reports that co-creator Graham had heard about on the news of young boys being involved in knife crimes. There was an incident where a young boy allegedly stabbed a girl, Graham told Netflix. It shocked me. I was thinking, what's going on? Graham is right to be shocked by the story of a young boy allegedly stabbing a girl. It's extremely rare. What is far more common is young men stabbing each other, a problem that is much harder to address with virtue signaling about social media influences and toxic masculinity. Adolescence itself is great. The reaction to it is deranged.
Have you watched Adolescence yet?
No, I haven't. I probably won't. It's a film on Netflix, and most of my time right now is spent visiting the country.
Why would you not want to know what people are talking about?
Well, I think that those are all important issues, and those were issues that I've been talking about for a long time. But in the same way that I don't need to watch Casualty to know what's going on in the NHS, I don't need to watch a specific Netflix drama to understand what's going on. It's a fictional series. It is not a documentary.
The difference this documentary has made compared to, say, a politician, any politician, leader of a party, the Prime Minister, going around talking in schools, is this has made much more of an impact than any politician has in terms of what people are talking about right now. So it's really confusing that you don't want to know why, how this has made an impact, how parents are now saying we need to know more about smartphone use.
I can read what people are saying about it. I look at research. This is something that I've been looking at for a long time.
You wouldn't want to know
But
straight from the horse's mouth.
One of the things that I'm more bothered by is the fact that just yesterday we had Labour telling us that they're not going to be investigating the rape gang scandal, something which had happened all across the country. That's real. That's happening right now. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a fictional documentary.
Do you think you're...
We had thousands of... If I may just finish. We had thousands of victims. Female victims, those are girls, young women, and some boys too. I met the mother of a boy who killed himself after being a victim. I want to talk about that because that is real. And yes, I'm glad that the Netflix drama is something that people are talking about, but it is not the only thing.
If you enjoy these videos, you should know that they're available as articles on my Substack days, weeks, and sometimes months ahead of time. Head on over to www.konstantinkisin.com now and subscribe. The world is changing fast, and it's not enough to just know what the news is. You have to know how it's being reported, because the truth often depends on where you're standing. That's why I use Ground News. It's the only website and app that gathers and compares news from over 50,000 sources around the world. It doesn't just show you the headlines, it also breaks down the political bias and who owns the media outlet you're reading or watching. When you know where the money is coming from, you start to understand how power and influence shape the stories we see. Their blind spot feed is my favorite feature. It shows you which stories are being ignored by either the left or the right, so you can actually spot media bias as it's happening and stay ahead of the narrative. They surface around 20 of these a day, and some of them are pretty eye-opening. This story on the UK developing a predictive tool to determine if someone will become a killer barely showed up in left-leaning outlets. It's a major story when you think about how far governments might go with AI and surveillance. And on the other side, this story about how more than 60% of CEOs expect a recession in the next 6 months currently has no coverage in right-leaning media at all. That's a pretty big blind spot when you're trying to understand where the economy might be headed. If you're someone who values nuance over noise, Ground News is essential. It's no wonder they have over 10,000 5-star reviews. Right now, trigonometry viewers can subscribe and get 40% off their Vantage plan. That's the same one I use. Click the link in the description and visit ground.news/trigonometry. Start thinking for yourself and subscribe at ground.news/trigonometry.